I'm Jennifer Gidley, and today I'm speaking to you from Australia. In my PhD research, I undertook to study the work of all the adult developmental psychologists. There's a couple of dozen qualities that have been identified by these psychologists in their research that they identify with post-formal reasoning or mature adult reasoning. What I continued to do with my PhD research was then look at the emerging alternative and innovative educational approaches in the late 20th and early 21st century, and identified what I called post-formal pedagogies or evolutionary pedagogies. Furthermore, when I looked at the post-formal and evolutionary pedagogies, I found evolutionary themes mapped onto those educational approaches. These post-formal pedagogies clustered around these four themes of love, life, wisdom, and voice. I see pedagogical love as an evolutionary force, pedagogical life as a sustaining force, pedagogical wisdom as a creative force, and pedagogical voice as an empowering force. So what educational approaches help to foster pedagogical love? They are caring approaches that warm education. They're approaches that develop reverence, care. They integrate heart and hand. And they include approaches such as spiritual, transformative and contemplative education, social and emotional education, and integral and holistic education. And here are some practical things that warm the children's hearts. Educators can acknowledge each individual child as a presence. They can connect authentically. You can nurture your children with beauty. You can develop community among your students. And you can encourage cooperation and collaboration. And importantly, you can take care of yourself as teachers. You need to practice self-love. So grow your own wisdom and your own aesthetic development. Model practical love and respect. Focus on intangibles such as meditation. And importantly, inspire a love of learning. I'm now going to look at pedagogical life. What educational approaches help to foster this? Enlivening approaches that revitalize education. The educational approaches that we focus on within pedagogical life are imaginative education, ecological, environmental and sustainable education, and futures and foresight education. There are practical ways to bring teaching to life. Firstly, develop your own imagination. Stretch yourselves. Use storytelling. Make it up, but make it relevant. We know that the image world, the media, the mass media, is full of a lot of negative images that young people are affected by, they're depressed by, they get a sense of hopelessness from the negativity in the media. So we need to focus on countering these negatives. You need to develop positive imagery for the young people, introduce them to positive things happening in the world. This is what we need to do to counter the negatives. Practical ways to enliven the curriculum: creative handwork, organic, out-of-the-box architecture helps them to think out of the box, rhyme and rhythm, cycles of nature, practice nature care, looking after gardens, growing vegetables, herbs, flowers. Thirdly, pedagogical wisdom. How do we educate for this? We need to use multimodal approaches to create discernment among young people. Wisdom education is about creativity. It's multimodal, it's layered. So there are educational approaches on creativity in education, complexity in education, even wisdom education itself. These are out there in the world. These are individual, innovative approaches to education that are already happening. We need to explore these, and I cohere them under the pedagogies of wisdom. How to be multimodal in your education. It's the bedrock of wisdom. As a teacher myself, as an educator, I danced between subject and context so that the young people saw the interconnectedness between what they were learning and everything else. Conceptually, through imaginative thinking and vitality. Visually, through using pictures, diagrams, getting the children to create artistic activities. Imaginatively, through story, poem, song, dance, role play. Or experientially through handwork, gardening, excursions, school camps. Then you can cultivate other broad literacies to help create discernment. There is a great value in free and creative play. What about games? Well, there's a lot of discussion about video games because many of them are violent, disruptive, but there are altruistic video games. There's a new genre of altruistic digital games. Board games can help to develop systems thinking. And then there are finally some unusual literacies, such as happiness, humour and laughter. Maggie McClure, British educator, talks about frivolity as one of those rare and special literacies we need to develop. Fourthly and finally, pedagogical voice. How do we educate to foster this? Multivocal approaches nurture empowerment. To develop the pedagogical voice, we need to focus on those many educational approaches which are multicultural, which help to develop self-reflection, and even to respect silence. Postmodern and post-structuralist pedagogies, aesthetic, artistic and poetic education, critical, post-colonial, global and planetary education. These are all individual educational approaches. There's 9 of them there I've just mentioned. They're all operating out there in little pockets in the world, and I cohere these under the idea of pedagogical voice. Why is human voice so important in education? Because today the human voice is continually mediated by technology. Reliance on technology, we know from research, limits language development in children. Many kindergarten children these days have delayed language, and we know from research also that children exposed to screen-mediated forms of communication become increasingly disconnected. So how do we strengthen human voice to help to empower the children? Many ways, a multitude of ways. Listen to the birds sing, listen to the wind whistle in the trees, waves break on the shore, a creek, a stream, babbling along. Imagine the difference between a joyful teacher starting a class with a song and a cranky teacher ordering children around. We can use poems, we can sing, we can dance, we can have natural conversation. What's wrong with everyday conversation between teachers and students and students? We can chant, we can tell stories, we can use wordplay like tongue twisters. And finally, learning a second or third language is brilliant for developing pedagogical voice, for developing multivocality, multicultural sensibility. So if you're interested in any further reading on these topics and themes, I've written The Post-Formal Education, A Philosophy for Complex Futures. It grew out of my PhD, and it really expands on all of these things that I've talked about today. My Oxford book, The Future, A Very Short Introduction, is looking at the many aspects of futures thinking, including 3,000 years of how humans have thought about the future, the evolution of the future studies field. I look at how we can compare and contrast technotopian exponential technology futures with human-centered futures, and how might they complement each other. And finally, I focus on the grand global futures challenges and what we can do about them to turn them around. Lastly, The Secret to Growing Brilliant Children is my book about Steiner education for the 21st century, drawing on my practical work as a Steiner educator and a lot of my academic work in contemporizing the best of Steiner education for the 21st century. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope you enjoyed watching and listening.